On September 19, 2023, Azerbaijan attacked the Armenian enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh after having blockaded the region for 9 tortuous months. Nearly all of the 120,000 residents immediately fled to Armenia in fear for their lives. These events shocked the conscience of the world. The Turkish ethnic cleansing of Armenians from their ancestral homelands began 1,825 years earlier when the Turkish Khazars first appeared on Armenia's borders and began to raid and plunder the nation in 198 AD. This is the story of the Turks' ongoing campaign to exterminate and replace the Armenian people and the Armenians' continuous struggle to survive for another generation. Azerbaijan and Israel maintain a strong military and economic alliance. Azerbaijan provides Israel with 40% of its oil. Israel is by far the largest supplier of arms to Azerbaijan and has sold the nation many billions of dollars worth of weapons meant to be employed against Armenia. The Israeli government long denied the Armenian genocide and celebrates Azerbaijani assaults on Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. This Judeo-Turkish alliance is not by any means new. The architect of the Armenian genocide, Talat Pasha, boasted that the Durrani Young Turks were members of the historic Judeo-Turkish alliance. Talat was himself Jewish, belonging to the Shabbatayan sect of Durrani crypto-Jews who orchestrated the Armenian genocide in 1915 after seizing power from the Sultan Abdul Hamid II in 1909. Sir Lawrence of Arabia revealed the ethnic and religious makeup of the Young Turk leadership.
The Young Turk movement was 50% crypto-Jew and 95% Freemason.
The British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Sir Gerard Lowther, wrote to the British Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey that Jews and Turks embraced one another in a, quote, dual alliance.
In its internal form, the committee appears to be a Judeo-Turkish dual alliance, the Turks supplying a splendid military material, and the Jews the brain, enterprise, money, ergo David Bay's recent loan in Paris, and a strong press influence in Europe, while, as shown by Zionist literature since the revolution, the Jewish world seems to have now turned its eyes towards Mesopotamia as the land best suited to Jewish colonization and the ultimate formation of a Jewish autonomous state. The Jews who now seem to inspire and control the inside machinery of the state and are bent on the economic and industrial capture of Young Turkey appear determined that no important enterprise shall be started in Mesopotamia without their participation, if not control. And it is perhaps significant that the attacks on Sir William Wilcox have been led by a Jew in a Jewish organ here, and the opposition to the lynch scheme in Turkish circles was mainly the work of Sassoon Effendi, the Jewish deputy for Baghdad. The Jews, in order to maintain their position of influence in Young Turkey circles, have to play up to, if not encourage, Turkish nationalist tendencies, and the two elements make a distinctly strong combination which has to be reckoned with, especially by those interested in Mesopotamia. It must, moreover, not be forgotten that the present form of constitutionalism in Turkey is not one which the masses have risen up and demanded, but is rather a form which a free-thinking oligarchy have imposed on the masses at the point of the bayonet. This minority, who are also in a sense anti-clerical, have felt the necessity of replacing the old theocratic conception of the deeply religious Mussulman by a new pan-Islamic and pan-Asiatic creed. Again, the purely Turkish element, inspired by its past traditions of conquest and its martial superiority, naturally arrogates to itself the role of protector of other Asiatic and Islamic peoples. The result is a strong anti-Russian current.
Serge Tanan, an exceptionally popular American Armenian singer and musician, has publicly condemned Israel's participation in the ongoing genocide of Armenians through its supply of billions of dollars worth of weapons and munitions directly to Azerbaijan, weapons which have been effectively used to slaughter civilians as well as soldiers.
Azerbaijan is preparing to attack Armenia and ethnically cleanse Artsakh with the help of Israeli weapons. A further example of the grandchildren of the Holocaust helping to murder the grandchildren of the genocide. Israel, you're murdering my people for a few shekels and your messianic war with Iran. We will not forget.
Tankian blasted Israel's participation in Azerbaijan's campaign to inflict harm on Armenians.
Israel's complicity in genocide is high due to their weapons sales and training of the genocidal dictatorship of Azerbaijan. Never again shouldn't just be for Jews.
The Turkish Khazars converted to Judaism sometime during the 7th or 8th centuries. This cemented the bond between Turks and Jews, which united them in their unbroken quest to remove Armenians from existence. The Khazars wanted the rich lands and strategic trade routes which had belonged to the Armenians for thousands of years. The Jews had religious motives for wanting to blot out the Armenians, whom they thought of as if the Old Testament Amalekites. The Jewish Encyclopedia recounts the history of the Kazarian campaign against Armenia, which began in 198 AD, as well as their conversion to the Jewish faith.
Khazars, a people of Turkish origin whose life and history are interwoven with the very beginnings of the history of the Jews of Russia. The kingdom of the Khazars was firmly established in most of South Russia long before the foundation of the Russian monarchy by the Varangians, 855. Jews have lived on the shores of the Black and Caspian Seas since the first centuries of the Common Era. Historical evidence points to the region of the Ural as the home of the Khazars. Among the classical writers of the Middle Ages, they were known as the Chozars, Khazirs, Akatsirs, and Akatirs, and in the Russian chronicles as Khwalises and Ugri-Bielie. The Armenian writers of the 5th and following centuries furnish ample information concerning this people. Moses of Turin refers to the invasion by the Khazirs of Armenia and Iberia at the beginning of the 3rd century. The Chaghan was the king of the north, the ruler of the Khazirs, and the queen was the Shatun. History of Armenia, 2-357. The Khazars first came to Armenia with the Basileans in 198. Though at first repulsed, they subsequently became important factors in Armenian history for a period of 800 years. Driven onward by the nomadic tribes of the steppes and by their own desire for plunder and revenge, they made frequent invasions into Armenia. The latter country was made the battleground in the long struggle between the Romans and the Persians. This struggle, which finally resulted in the loss by Armenia of her independence, paved the way for the political importance of the Khazars. The conquest of eastern Armenia by the Persians in the 4th century rendered the latter dangerous to the Khazars, who, for their own protection, formed an alliance with the Byzantines. It was probably about that time that the Kagan of the Khazars and his grandees, together with a large number of his heathen people, embraced the Jewish religion. According to A. Harkavy, Misef Nidahim 1, the conversion took place in 620. According to others, in 740.
The Jewish Khazar Turks spawned the Seljak Turks in the 11th century. The founding leader, Seljak, was the son of a Khazar commander and was raised in the Kazarian court. The Seljak Turks overran Armenia and captured Jerusalem. Seljak himself was likely Jewish and gave 2 of his sons Jewish names. In response to the Seljak Turkish invasion, many Armenians fled and formed the Lesser Armenian Kingdom of Kilikia, which was to play a pivotal role in the Crusades and which preserved the Christian Armenian nation. The Mongols, who were related to the Turks, then conquered Armenia, and the two peoples formed a short-lived alliance in the middle of the 13th century against the Mamluk Muslims. It wasn't long before the next wave of Turks swooped in on the Armenians from Central Asia in the late 1200s. These Ottoman Turks eventually carried out the Armenian genocide in the latter half of the 19th century and early 20th century from 1894 to 1920. The carnage rapidly escalated during and after World War I and claimed between 600,000 and 1.5 million Armenian lives. After taking the Byzantine capital of Constantinople in 1453, the Ottomans welcomed in the Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1492. Those Jews formed a large and powerful community in Salonika, which eventually produced the Dönme followers of Shabbatai Zevi, who incited the Turks and Kurds to commit mass murder and plunder against their Armenian neighbors during the Armenian genocide. The crypto-Jewish Dönme and Jewish Freemasonic Young Turks seized absolute control over the Ottoman Empire in the years 1908 and 1909. Their primary goals included partitioning the territory of Palestine into an independent Jewish homeland and the complete destruction of the Armenian Amalekites residing in the empire. It had been Zevi's goal to take Palestine from the Turks since the fateful year 1666. Zionist Theodor Herzl sought to blackmail the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Abdulhamid II, into selling Palestine to the Rothschild bankers in exchange for healing the sick man of Europe's debt crisis and providing positive press for the Ottoman Empire in the West after the Sultan's minions committed atrocities against the Christian Armenians during the Hamidian massacres of 1894 to 1896, which incited the Europeans and Americans against Ottoman Turkey. Herzl pledged to solve the Sultan's problems if the Sultan gave Palestine to the Jews. The Sultan refused and sealed his fate. The Judeo-Turkish alliance became complete under the rule of the revolutionary Jewish Young Turks, which then transitioned into Kemalist Turkey after the World War under Shabbatai Zevi's descendant, the former Young Turk Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Ataturk ended the Turkish Islamic Caliphate and duped the Turks into giving up their imperialistic ambitions in the name of embracing secular Turkish nationalism. Ataturk also helped the Freemasonic crypto-Jewish Bolsheviks Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Lenin to take control of the fledgling First Republic of Armenia, which had emerged from the wreckage of the Ottoman Empire after the Ottomans' defeat in the First World War. The complex and continuous history of the Judeo-Turkish alliance will all be explained in greater detail and become clearer as we proceed to the current existential crisis that Armenia faces today. Both Armenia and Iran are targets of the Judeo-Turkish alliance. Israel has armed the Azerbaijanis to the teeth and established military air bases in Azerbaijan from which to launch air attacks on Iran and in which Israeli jets can refuel after having bombed Iranian targets. The linguistically Turkish Azerbaijanis have taken Nagorno-Karabakh by force and are threatening to annex all of Armenia, which they refer to as Western Azerbaijan. Israel strongly supports the Turks and Azerbaijanis in their aggressive measures against Armenian sovereignty and life, and in their shameless and self-serving denial of the Armenian genocide. The Old Testament expressly and firmly commands the Israelites to completely and utterly exterminate the Amalekite people. Modern Jews refer to Jesus Christ as Yeshu, which is an acronym for "May his name and memory be obliterated." The Armenians were the first Christian nation and are thought to be the Amalekites by the Jews. The 10th century Yosippon chronicles condemned the Armenians to extinction by identifying them with the Amalekites whom the Jews are duty-bound to annihilate, down to the last man, woman, child, and fetus. Stephen Bowman noted in his translation of the Sefer Yosippon a sort of pseudo-Josephus.
The two leaves indicate a Byzantine origin with interesting differences noted by Flusser in his variant readings. The most interesting is the addition to the word Armenians. They are Amalekites. The 10th century emperors of the Byzantine Empire were indeed of Armenian stock, which a Byzantine Jew would probably identify with the archenemy of the Jews, a tradition going back to the book of Exodus. Here, then, we have a possible reference to the persecution of Romanos Lekapenos, if not Basil I, 867-886. Also, many of the names are spelled differently from Flusser's version. The contribution of South Italian Jewry to Jewish culture. Manuscript glosses after Armeni. These are Amalek. This designation is still current among Turkish Sephardi Jews and the Jews of Georgia and eastern Galicia.
Exodus chapter 17 verses 14 to 16 and Deuteronomy chapter 25, 17 to 19 leave no room for doubt or misinterpretation. Israelites absolutely must commit total genocide against the Amalekites and can never relent until not a single descendant of Amalek is left to kill. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, King Saul is punished for sparing the life of a single Amalekite, King Agag.
Deuteronomy 25:17-19. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt. When you were weary and worn out, they met you on your journey and attacked all who were lagging behind. They had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land, He is giving you to possess as an inheritance. You shall blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Exodus 17:14-16. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven." Moses built an altar and called it "The Lord is my banner." He said, "Because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation."
Haman is the most infamous and deeply hated Amalekite of them all. Jews believe Haman was an Armenian.
The peculiar hatred which the Jews bear to the Armenians may arise from a charge often brought against them, namely, that Haman was an Armenian, and that the Armenians are the Amalekites of the Bible.
In 1850, Rabbi Joseph Schwartz documented the fact that contemporary Jews of the East referred to Armenians as the Amalekites.
The Armenians are usually called by the Eastern Jews Amalekim, perhaps owing to a tradition that they settled in the north, where the present Armenians are found.
Reverend Joseph Wolfe was surprised that Jews bore such racial and religious animosity towards Armenians, given that the Armenians had only showed kindness to the Jews. He wrote in 1839,
It is a remarkable fact that the Armenians, who are detested by the Jews, as the supposed descendants of the Amalekites, are the only Christian church in the East who have interested themselves for the protection and conversion of the Jews.
The Encyclopedia Judaica notes in its article Armenia that Jews often dubbed the Armenians Amalekites.
Armenia is also sometimes called Amalek in some sources, and Jews often referred to Armenians as Amalekites. This is the Byzantine term for the Armenians.
The entry for Armenia in the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia pointedly states that Oriental Jews call Armenians Timhei and mean thereby that the Armenians must be exterminated.
Since the Armenians are considered descendants of the Amalekites, they are called among the Jews of the Orient also Timhei, thou shalt blot out. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 19, referring to the Amalekites.
The Donme Young Turks were Zionists who wanted to claim Palestine as their Jewish homeland. According to the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, folio 20b, the Jews were obliged to exterminate the Amalekites when entering Palestine, as was their plan. They also had to construct a temple and anoint a king, but cutting off the Armenian Amalekites was their first obligation, which they met by deliberately murdering 1.5 million Armenians.
3 commandments were given to Israel when they entered the land. 1, to appoint a king. 2, to cut off the seed of Amalek. 3, and to build themselves the chosen house that is the temple. And I do not know which of them has priority. Yet I still do not know which of the other 2 comes first, the building of the chosen temple, or the cutting off of the seed of Amalek. It is to be inferred that the extermination of Amalek is first.
The genocidal crypto-Jewish Young Turks phrased their extermination orders in expressly biblical terms.
It had previously been communicated that the government, by order of the Cemiyet, the Committee of the Ittihad, had decided to completely annihilate all Armenians living in Turkey. Those who oppose this command and decision cannot remain part of the official structure of the state. Without paying attention to woman, child, and incompetent, no matter how tragic the methods of annihilation might be, without listening to feelings of conscience, their existence must be ended. Although the intent has long existed to eliminate the empire's Armenian subjects, who have for centuries longed to undermine the sound foundations of the state and posed a serious threat for the government, the suitable conditions to do so did not exist, and it was therefore not possible to realize this sacred aim. Since all obstacles to this course of action have now been removed, and the time has come to rescue the homeland from this dangerous element, it is necessary to work, both consciously and with full commitment, and without giving in to feelings of mercy and compassion, to blot out the name Armenian in Turkey by putting a complete end to their existence.
The Armenians have not yet been completely blotted out, but are once again openly threatened with genocide. There are well-funded efforts to build a temple in Jerusalem, and there is excited talk of the arrival of the Messiah. All of this spells doom for the Armenians if steps are not taken to ensure their safety and well-being. In his book, Reckless Rights, Elliot Horowitz has documented several incidents of Jewish attacks on Armenians and believes they were driven by the belief that Armenians are Amalekites. Violence and injustice are frequently visited upon the Armenians in Jerusalem, and many of the Jews there have returned to their ancient custom of spitting on Christians. The Grey Wolf terrorist network of Turks and Azerbaijanis spreads anti-Armenian and pan-Turkish vitriol throughout the Turkish world. Grey Wolves publicly vilify and dehumanize Armenians. Their rhetoric is both vindictive and genocidal. They often gesture with their hands shaped into the form of a wolf's head, as did the medieval Turks who invaded Western Asia and Europe. The Grey Wolves are the modern manifestation of the ancient Turkish pursuit of a grand Eurasian empire, spreading out from Hungary and Finland in the west to the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in the east. From certain angles, their wolf's head-hand gesture resembles an inverted letter A. Azerbaijan has taken to displaying an inverted letter A on their military vehicles in a fashion similar to the Russian Z, emblazoned on Russian tanks, trucks, and flags. The inverted A symbolizes the planned Azerbaijani annexation of the Sunnik province of Armenia, which would unify Azerbaijan into a contiguous state, connected to the nation of Turkey on its westernmost border. The acquisition of this major chunk of Armenian territory would represent a major advance in the Turks' ancient quest for a unified pan-Turkic Eurasian empire. The uppermost points of the upside-down Azerbaijani A are meant to indicate the Nakhchivan region on the left and Azerbaijan proper to the right. The crossbar of the inverted A depicts the proposed Zangezur corridor, which would connect Nakhchivan directly to Azerbaijan by road and rail. Pan-Turkism, which was created by Zionist crypto-Jews, deliberately alienated Armenians, Jews, and Arabs from the ruling Turks of the Ottoman Empire with the intent of exterminating the Armenians, driving Jews to Palestine, and weakening the Arabs' ability to defend themselves from the Jewish invasion of Palestine. The original architects of the Pan-Turkist movement were the Zionist crypto-Jews Arminius Vambary, born Hermann Bamberger, and Moise Cohen, who changed his name to Munis Tekinalp. Vambary invented Pan-Turkism for the purpose of generating a war between the Ottoman Empire and Russia so as to free up Palestine for the Zionists and free up Russian Jews for emigration to Palestine. The international Jewish bankers, most especially the Rothschilds through the Jewish British Prime Minister Disraeli, and other agents, were constantly manufacturing wars at the time between Russia and Turkey towards identical ends. Munis Tekinalp and later Mehmet Zia Gökalp employed Pan-Turkism as a weapon of war against the Armenians, as well as a means to free up Palestine for the taking by Jewry, all in the name of excluding Arabs, and to promote the destruction of the Turkish Islamic Caliphate and the rise of secularism among Turks, so that Islam could not unify in opposition to the Zionist acquisition of Palestine for the formation of a Jewish homeland, and Turkish Muslims would not feel obliged to rescue Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, and the Dome of the Rock from Jewish messianic conquest. Their pan-Turkish efforts atomized Islam, took away the Turks' desire to control Palestine, amplified the Arab-Turkish divide, and rendered the Turks content with the loss of their empire, caliphate, and Jerusalem. Pan-Turkism prevailed in Soviet Azerbaijan, where Pan-Turkists planned to assimilate Nagorno-Karabakh into Azerbaijan and ultimately to bring Turkey into the Soviet fold and unify with it by destroying Armenia and the Armenians who stood between Azerbaijan and Turkey. Their plans are being carried out today. The New Testament is one long, continuous tale of Jewish plots against Christ and Christians. Nero's crypto-Jewish wife, Poppaea Sabina, ordered the mass persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. The Old Testament condemned the Amalekites and Edomites to extermination. The Talmud, Toledot Yeshu, and Kabbalah are virulently anti-Christian. Justin Martyr recounted the horrific persecution of ancient Christians at the hands of Jews. Jews opened the gates of many Christian cities to Muslim conquerors and sold Christian females to Muslims and the Chinese as sex slaves for many centuries. Jews closed the gates of Toledo, Spain, to fleeing Catholics and opened them to the invading Muslims under Tariq ibn Ziyad. Jewish armies led by Nehemiah ben Hushil and Benjamin of Tiberias joined with Persians to slaughter Byzantine Christians and destroy their churches and holy sites during the Sasanian conquest of Jerusalem in 614 AD. Jews then benefited from the Arab conquest of Jerusalem over the Persians in 636. Stanford J. Shaw documented many instances where Jews joined with Muslim Ottoman Turks to conquer several Christian cities in Europe in his book The Jews of the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Republic, Macmillan, London, 1991, at pages 25 to 36. This included the assistance which the Jews provided to the Turks in the conquest of Bursa in 1324 by Orhan, the son of Osman. It also included Jewish aid given to the Turks during the Muslim conquest of Gallipoli by Orhan's son, Suleiman Pasha of Ankara, and the conquest of Adrianople in 1363 by Murad I. Large numbers of Jews moved in to replace the displaced and massacred Christians. Jews opened the gates of Constantinople to the invading Muslim Turks so that they could conquer the Byzantine Christians. The Jews opened up the Jewish quarter of Constantinople to the armies of Mehmed II in 1453 and assisted them in the destruction of the Christians. Mehmed II, Mohammed the Conqueror, immediately granted the Jews equal rights with Muslims. Jews again betrayed the Christians of the island of Rhodes in 1522, Buda and Pest in 1526, and Belgrade in 1526. Jews also assisted the Turks in Azerbaijan in 1534, in Iraq and Iran from 1534 to 1535, and in 1638, as well as in Yemen in 1628. Suleiman the Magnificent richly rewarded the Jews for betraying their Christian neighbors to Turkish conquest. Israel assists Muslim Azerbaijan and Turkey to wage war on Christian Armenia, and the Mossad is heavily embedded among the Kurds, whose ancestors assisted Turks in the rampant slaughter of Armenians. The Young Turks were Kabbalistic followers of the false Jewish Messiah Shabbatai Zevi. Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 10 admonishes the Israelites to never plow with an ox yoked to a donkey. The donkey symbolizes the wild ass Ishmael, who is the father of the Muslims. The ox signifies Christ and Christians. The genius of Vilna explained that all this should be interpreted to mean that Jews must in every generation place a Messiah son of Joseph over Christendom to drive it into self-ruin, and likewise empower a Messiah son of David to rule over and destroy the Muslims. These two forces must be prevented from ever uniting against the Jews, and instead be provoked to wage perpetual war against each other. The ox and donkey must never plough together, or it will be the end of Jewry. Instead, they should be misled to mutually consume one another and leave the Jews standing as lone masters of the earth. A Jewish liturgical poem composed in the 11th century Akdamut describes a great battle between the Leviathan, meaning Christendom, and the Behemoth, representing Islam. The God of Israel will slay both of them. In other words, the Jews will pit Islam and Christendom against one another so that they mutually consume each other. The Leviathan is Christendom, the Jesus fish of Pisces. Islam is the Behemoth ploughing the fields for Jewry. The Book of Job describes Leviathan as the enemy of God and Behemoth as God's beneficent agent. Jews tend to favor Islam over Christianity because Muslims more closely keep to the Noahide laws, and Christians are perceived to be idolaters, and the Romans, who destroyed the temple and forced the diaspora upon the Jewish nation.
In halakha, Jewish law, Muslims are recognized as Noahides in the full sense of the term. Muhammad himself established a system for Noahides. It is almost a perfect system for Noahides in Islam.
The question is what is the status of Christianity and Islam in the eyes of God in the Jewish faith? They're very, very different. The question was specifically idolatry, so I'm going to answer that question in that narrow sense. Christianity is complete idolatry.
The Young Turks beheaded many Armenians at the inception of the Armenian genocide in April of 1915. This barbaric ritual obliged both the Talmudic prescriptions against idolatry pursuant to the Judaic Noahide laws and those of Islam. The Azerbaijanis likewise decapitated Armenians during and after the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. Just as Israel provided arms to Azerbaijan for the purpose of committing genocide against the Armenians, the crypto-Jewish Freemason Parvus supplied weapons to the Young Turks. Both he and the Zionist Vladimir Jabotinsky were propagandists for Young Turkey and the Russian Revolution. The Prophet Muhammad had two Jewish wives, Rayhana bint Zayed and Safiya bint Huyai. The Behemoth of Islam was manufactured as a weapon of war against the Leviathan of Byzantine Roman Christendom and used to forcefully impose the Noahide laws on Gentiles upon pain of decapitation. The mid-8th century Jewish apocalypse entitled The Secrets of Rabbi Simon ben Yochai reveals the fact that Islam was created in order to wipe out the Christians, and it encourages Jews to encourage Muslims to do so, as is happening in the ongoing Armenian genocide. Leviathan is a sea monster, Behemoth a land beast. The Behemoth powers expanded to include the Eurasianist Marxists who rule over Islam as well as Russia and China. Lenin declared war on the Leviathan sea powers of Great Britain and America, whom the Eurasianist Marxists refer to as the Atlanticists, in reference to the ocean and primordial chaotic waters of the Leviathan sea demon. The Russian chaos magician Alexander Dugin expresses himself and his Kabbalistic end times eschatology in precisely these terms. Dugin is commonly known as Putin's brain. Islamic strife against Armenia was used to draw Turkey and Azerbaijan into the Russian fold and away from NATO at the expense of Christian Armenians. Pan-Turkism is a major element in the Eurasianist scheme of subsuming and exterminating European Edomites and Amalekites in the name of social justice and the artificial communist struggle against fascism.